Teachers everywhere are in pretty universal agreement that consistency helps. But what I want you to do is to say we're going to be consistent about our approach and a little less worried about being consistent about the outcome. There are a multitude of different conflicts that can appear in your school, and the idea that we can pigeonhole them into a consistent outcome is something that's going to frankly drive you a little crazy. I would rather you had the opportunity to approach conflict in a really healthy way. And now that we have chosen to approach conflict from a position of adornment, we love it when conflict comes along. We want to know how to handle it effectively, how to do it consistently. And so at a one-on-one level, so I want you to imagine for a second, because this will be really difficult for you, to imagine that you've had a bit of conflict with a student and you need to have the chat because your teacher radar has pinged, hasn't it? Something's happened that you've gone, I reckon that's worth a chat. And what we want you to do is to approach that chat in a really consistent way. In our schools, we advocate doing it through an affective interaction. And the first thing you need to do when you're going to conduct an affective interaction is think about your mindset as you walk up to that student. I want you to choose a mindset for that student that they're going to win. In that conversation, they're going to have a fantastic win that's going to be celebrated, they're going to be thanked, they're going to be congratulated by you for the art or the act of taking personal responsibility. So once you've made that decision, you cast aside the idea that because there's a bit of conflict they need to lose in some way or pay for their contribution to the conflict, or that you need to win. And we're going to say, I want the student to win, because when they do, through the act of personal responsibility, you win. So the way that we're going to tackle this through an effective interaction is this intention around past, present, future. You don't have a lot of time. So we've got to be able to conduct this conversation really quickly. And the first thing we're going to do is to ask this student a past-based question like, hey Fred, what's the story with not starting your work? And you'll notice it isn't a rant, it isn't me lecturing Fred, because what's going to happen at this point is Fred in his head is going to be thinking blah, blah, blah. And this isn't useful in terms of getting a productive behaviour out of Fred. Because one of the things that's a pretty universal truth about human behaviour is that most of it can be predicted by the thinking that precedes it. And if Fred's thinking blah, 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 while I'm giving him a brilliantly worded lecture, it's unlikely that I'm going to get a fantastic behaviour from him next. And sometimes I'm going to get a palatable answer from Fred when I ask him that question. It could be, Mister, I just don't understand it. And that's really easy. I know what to do about that, and I can help him and get him moving. I could get a less palatable answer from Fred, and it could be that well-versed, it's almost English language, but not quite. When students don't say, I don't know, but they kind of go, that every teacher is fully familiar with. And in that moment, I want you to just sort of lean forward slightly. I want you to make direct eye contact, and I want you to say, no worries, I'll just give you a moment to think it through. And I want you to stare, and I want you to give them that wait time. Because what I think you can predict with a high degree of accuracy is that what's happening in Fred's head now is something like, why is this person staring at me? What does she want to know? Why haven't I started? I was just being lazy. So maybe I was just being lazy is a less palatable answer, but if you can get that from Fred, you can move the conversation forward. Sometimes I get a super unpalatable answer. I might get Fred in even more colourful language that I'm going to provide you with right now, tell me that it's because you're a rubbish teacher. Now, the point of the past-based question is not to get the truth. It's not to get friendly. It's just to get Fred engaged. And so I'm going to accept that answer. And I know that'll sound really strange. I know that when a student tells you you're a rubbish teacher, the urge to rant and let Fred go blah, blah, blah in his head is incredibly strong. Resist that urge. Instead, completely freak Fred out by saying to him, appreciate you letting me know, Fred, let's move on. And the present-based question we want to ask next is something like, how do you reckon this is making me feel? Now again, there's a chance you'll get an unpalatable answer at this point. Fred may say to you, I don't care. And you can be ready with a little stored response for that moment, which is usually for me, I didn't ask if you cared, I asked if you know. And Fred will have to think through. And what we've got, Fred is further engaged now in the conversation. You might say, I don't know, a bit annoyed. Yeah, you're probably right, Fred. That's the damage, isn't it? Past-based question done. And then we're on to the future. Hey, Fred, what do you reckon you can do so that I'm no longer annoyed? And Fred might mutter under his breath, start my work, I suppose. At which point you go, fantastic. And I need you to stare. I need you to embrace the silence one more time and let Fred's pen hit that page. Because when it does, you have a wonderful opportunity to place a calm and friendly hand on Fred's shoulder and say, "Thanks, Fred, really appreciate that," and walk off. And what Fred has learned is that the norm in your classroom, when totally expectable conflict comes along, is that an authority figure, you, will show up, conduct a fair and reasonable conversation that ends with him getting thanked and congratulated. And that can be taken to scale. I want you to even think for a second about what that's like the second time. So let's say 2 or 3 days later, Fred's demonstrating exactly the same behaviour of not getting his work commenced. I want you to imagine what happens when you walk over, put your chair next to Fred and say, "Hey, what's the story with not starting your work?" I think there's a likelihood that what Fred will do is go, okay, and start his work. And if Fred does, just to make you, this odd, old, feelings obsessed teacher, go away, I'm pretty happy with that. I'll take it. And what you're doing in your classroom is changing for your young people. And what you're doing, if you can collectively with your colleagues take this to scale at your school, is changing the end game for young people around where conflict finishes. Where conflict finishes with a young person getting a ritualised penalty or a punishment in some way, we can expect the young people to lengthen the period of time that you have to investigate and ascertain blame. We can expect them to lie. We can expect them to exaggerate. We can expect them to obfuscate and to omit detail. Because when the game for young people ends with a punishment or a sanction, then there's really only one thing to do. Prevent that punishment or sanction, or much of it at least, coming your way. But when young people know that conflict ends with being thanked and congratulated for the act of personal responsibility, they rush to it. They'll get there more quickly, as per Fred's example in the second time. And your involvement in perfectly expectable conflict will start to reduce. That's what I want for you.